Okay, welcome everybody to this talk today. My name is Michelle May. I'm a third year student here at York, a psychology student, and I am delighted to introduce this talk today on responding to stress with resilience. I'm very pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Karisha George, who is an associate lecturer within the psychology department here at York. She's previously completed her PhD at the uni, exploring the resilient thinking patterns that help students adjust to university life, and has since expanded her research to explore different student groups across various universities. She is passionate about student well-being and promoting resilient living amongst university students. And she's found that these findings have been applicable to the wider population as university students complete their degree. And that will form the basis of what will be presented today. So I will let her lead the way.
Hi everyone, as Michelle said, thanks Michelle for that introduction. I am Karisha Kimone George, and I'll be presenting today on kind of tips and tricks on how to respond to stress with resilience. So just a general outline before we begin. I'll start off with basic steps. So what is resilience? I'll be describing this in relation to well-being, which is something a concept you might be a bit more familiar with. And then we go on to kind of understand what resilience entails, and I'll give a brief introduction to the resilience process. And then I'll start with those tricks about how to become resilient. And the focus on this will be on how to develop resilient thinking patterns. So when we come to first try to understand what resilience entails, what I want us to think about is our lives on a whole. So our lives are characterized by hills and valleys, no matter who we are. We can be a student, we can be a young person, we can be an older person. So think of the hills firstly. Think of the times when you've achieved a long-term goal. So as a student, they could be getting into university. For the non-students among us, this can be buying a house, getting a dream job. Then think about developing a skill. So for me, it was about learning how to cook. I did not know how to cook when I first came over to this country. For you, it might be learning how to make new friends. For students, learning how to think critically. Then think of another hill. So gaining recognition for something, like winning a contest. Or for students, getting your degrees. So that's the positive things in life. And there are also the valleys, the things that we don't really want to think about or consider. So we have relationship difficulties, doing poorly on an assignment if you're a student, losing a loved one, getting sick, not sleeping well, and feeling lonely. And these are typical aspects of life. So life is about those hills and those valleys. And when we start to think about that overall picture of our lives in terms of hills and valleys, what we might be most familiar with considering is our well-being. So well-being is the first myth I want to bust in this talk, is that well-being is happiness. Well-being is completely different from happiness. It's about a positive state, yes, but it also relates to societies and not just individuals. The core aspect of well-being is about your quality of life and having an ability, both in people and societies, to contribute to the world with a sense of meaning and of purpose. And this definition comes from the World Health Organization. So when you think about your well-being, it's the extent to which you feel that you're capable to make a change and to make those changes that are most important to you as well. So when you think about well-being in that way, what I want you to kind of figure out or kind of hone in on is that, yes, it's different from happiness, but what helps you to do that? What helps you to go through those hills and valleys and still feel confident in that capacity is resilience. That's why resilience is what is going to form the major part of the talk today. Resilience is about kind of bolstering yourself against those valleys and kind of appreciating those highs, those hills. It's core to well-being. So it's core to being resilient in life is core to high levels of well-being and maintaining those high levels of well-being. So the definition that you will see if you kind of look it up on Google Scholar or kind of do a bit more of a deep dive and look at various podcasts, etc., is that it's about the capacity to bounce back after an experience. The experience can be major, such as losing a loved one, and it can be those minor daily hassles, such as missing the bus, etc. Things that cause us to feel like if we're stumbling off our regular mode of being. So this is one of the first research projects that we performed this year, and we kind of looked at a small sample around 70 students, and we wanted to confirm that within the student population, high levels of resilience are related to positive well-being outcomes. So across the bottom here, you see the different outcomes, such as life orientation, and that's about look on your your chances in life, satisfaction with your life, and the level of psychological distress. So the blue bars are those with low levels of resilience, and the dark green bars are those with high levels of resilience. And what you see is those with higher levels of resilience have a more positive life orientation, they're more satisfied with their life, and they have lower levels of psychological distress. Now, this was performed among students, but this relationship between resilience and well-being is well known across the literature in the wider adult population as well. So now that you have an understanding of why resilience is important to those levels of well-being, let's get an understanding of what resilience actually entails. So there are different types of resilience. I don't want us thinking resilience and thinking all those hills and valleys mean that we go through those valleys without feeling any kind of wobbly or without stumbling. Because remember, resilience is about, yes, feeling that stumble, but being able to pick yourself back up over time. So the first thing I want us to talk about or to consider is that there are different types of resilience. Someone can go through a major life event and they can emerge with dysfunctional resilience, what we call reintegrating after the event, but with a sense of loss. So that's when the person will have stuff like substance abuse or intense anger, and that will be continuously happening after the event has occurred. But the person can eventually, over time, go into the second type of resilience, which I like to term survival resilience. So you won't really see this term anyway. This is my term, so I'm going to copyright that one. That is when you just go on with your life with no sense of loss, no sense of improvement. You just focus on pushing through. Right? So, for instance, if you lose someone, you try not to remember them, you're still able to function, you're still able to go to work, you're still able to have those periods of happiness, you're still able to enjoy your activities, but you don't actually process that event in any way. But the person can eventually do that processing and reach flourishing resilience, where you're bolstered, you're a better person because of that experience. And I know I use the term processing, which might be a bit difficult, but we will also explain that in a bit. Right, so it's about basically thinking about it and finding some kind of meaning in it. And you flourish, you have your best skin, you're slaying every day, those kind of things, right? You feel like you're your best self. And so you can actually start off with dysfunctional resilience, but you can go into survival and then eventually reach flourishing. The other myth that I want to bust today is the concept that essentially when you have an experience happen, you fall into one of those categories automatically. So somebody in flourishing resilience will respond flourishingly to the experience, and that is definitely not the case. How we respond to an experience is dependent on the protective factors we have at that point. And when I talk about protective factors, I'm talking about things like your social support. The extent to which you've experienced a similar event before develops your capacity, if you've processed it, made sense of it, meaning in it, it develops your capacity to not feel wobble or to not wobble or to not stumble if the event occurs again. So it's these protective factors that determine when a stressor, an adversity, a major life event knocks us over. So when we're talking about knocking us over, think about who you are when you are your best self. And that is your bio-psycho-spiritual homeostasis. That's when your biological functioning is going well, your psychological functioning is going well, and your spiritual functioning is going well. But if we have a major event and we do not have the protective factors to kind of help us maintain whatever we are knocked off from the bio-psycho-spiritual homeostasis to what the literature calls a disruption. So throughout life, it is normal. Even resilient people feel that disruption, right? Even people, who are flourishing in their resilience. But in that disruption, you have those thoughts, those emotions that you can't really feel like if you're controlling. You feel that sadness, you feel that anxiety, you feel not yourself. And that's normal. But over time, it is a process of resilience that we start to reintegrate. And that reintegration phase, what happens during that phase, then determines what level of resilience we then have following the event. Now, this can be a very long-term process. So you can reintegrate into dysfunctional resilience, and then over time survival, and then over time flourishing, or you can reintegrate into survival, and then a similar event happens that pushes you down, you go into dysfunctional, and then over time you go back into survival, go into flourishing. Right? So it's about just understanding that the resilience process is not a straightforward one. It also has its hills and valleys involved in it. So just a quick check-in to make sure everybody's understanding. Thus far, you have two things that I want to essentially have you understanding so far that All responses can form parts of resilience. You can immediately respond with survival and then over time become flourishing. And it is typical for flourishing resilience to emerge after a long-term process. So having those dips in well-being where you have those thoughts you don't feel like if you can control, etc., that's a normal part of the resilience process. What determines whether if it's abnormal is the length of time that those thoughts remain. And in the literature, you'll see essentially what those typical lengths of time entail. So we won't go into that too much right now. Okay, so how do we then kind of get ourselves from survival resilience or dysfunctional resilience into that flourishing resilience? And what we're going to do in this next little brief part of the talk is to talk about the core factor that the research suggests is the thing you should focus on. So core to resilience reintegration. Remember we had that little circle that said reintegration before we stemmed off into the different types of resilience. So core to actually where we end up and which resilience we start off with is what happens during that reintegration process. So core to flourishing and where we get to our full potential following the events is what happens during that reintegration, right? Many factors have been identified as a trick for us to focus on during this reintegration phase, but we wanted to know, okay, so there's multiple factors. There must be some core process, core mechanism that is determining how these factors actually their impact. And so I chose religion, and I'm like, okay, let's see, religion is related to resilience. How does religion enable people to develop flourishing resilience? So for those who aren't very familiar with the literature, this is just another study we ran with around, I think, 70 participants. Again, they were students, but this relationship is also already very prevalent in the literature. And what we did, we looked at their levels of religiosity. It was measured with their commitment to their religion. And what we're seeing here, we also measured their resilience, sorry. And what we're seeing here is that those with lower levels of religiosity had consistently lower scores in terms of their levels of resilience compared to those with higher levels of religiosity. So within the sample, we were able to confirm that among students, as well as among the relationship has already been established within the wider population, religiosity is related to higher levels of resilience. But we wanted to know why was this the case, and we started looking at their thinking. So before we came to this point, we had explored a lot of different thinking patterns. We explored positive thinking, we explored negative thinking, we explored savoring, which is the capacity to kind of relish your positive experiences. We explored the level of attachment to God, the extent to which they see God as benevolent, etc., etc. And the thing that we actually found emerging was that it was how they kind of used God to make sense of their experiences. Right? If I put two quotes in, I'll read them out so that you kind of, we make sure we're going at the same pace and I don't go before you. So resilience, I just see it as being able to overcome like certain challenges that you may be facing, but you always need something to help you to be resilient. As a child of God, you need grace in all things in general life. Like you would need grace to do well, to pass an exam, to get a job, like in life. You will get to a point where like your human ability is not enough to succeeding and what you're trying to do. So that's where grace comes in. The second participant says, for me, like resilience means having trust, no matter what. Because in Islam, we believe that everything has been written, what's going to happen to us, what decisions we're going to be making, we kept it exactly as participants wrote it. Going to make all is written down. So it's just trust the plan and trust your instincts. Just trust God's plan, to be honest. So what we see emerging in these contributions from participants is that it's not just about a belief in God and you just go on with life, but their belief in God is integrated into their experiences, integrated into how they're finding meaning in these experiences. These type of responses were garnered from a very intense qualitative study where we did digital storytelling, and the students then had to create videos of their experience with God, and it came out in the videos as well. And that highlighted for us that the impact of religion on resilience might be most likely explained by making sense of their experiences, the extent to which they find meaning. So the take-home message from this little subsection is that making sense, referred to as finding meaning, has consistently emerged as a core thinking pattern generating flourishing resilience. It has been linked to, for instance, social support. So research has suggested that it's not just social support being present for absence, but it's social support that matters to the individual, that supports them in that finding meaning process. Positive thinking is the same thing. It enables the participants to find a specific type of meaning, which we'll go to in the next section. So meaning and significance, what enables them to be able to pull out the silver lining of their experiences. And personality traits such as agreeableness. So agreeableness is your capacity to get along with others. And that then links to the social support qualities, the quality of the social support you will have, which then also explains to us why that is to making sense of the experiences, making sense of your experiences. But I want you to not get too bogged down just yet. Yes, we've broadened down, we've kind of cut down all the major factors into one factor, which is this making sense, but there are multiple ways that you can make sense or find meaning in your experiences. And that's what we're going to do within the next section. So in this next section, I'm going to essentially introduce two main aspects of making sense of your experience that you can engage in. Right, and I've given an example at the side to kind of help you to fully understand what it is. And then we'll get into those tips and tricks. So the first one is meaning and comprehensibility. So I have written here that it involves fitting the event into one's existing schemas. And that's the academic statement, the academic explanation. But what I want you to think about when you're thinking about this type of resilience is think about a puzzle. So I'm a jigsaw creator, so puzzles is automatically what comes to my mind. And when you think about a puzzle, think about that you're almost done with your puzzle. It's all finished and you have that one last piece, right? For us who create puzzles, we know what this is about. We know that anticipation. And that last piece is your experience that you've had. And your puzzle is your brain, so all these schemas. So when I talk about schemas, it's ways in which you have kind of made sense of the world. Research suggests that we are born with certain schemas, so that the world is just, people get what they deserve, those kind of things, right? So we have those broad schemas, those broad kind of ways in which we process our events. And then we have this little puzzle, this event, right? And we found a meaning in that event. And that meaning and comprehensibility is us focusing on finding a meaning that fits in with the rest of our meaning making that we have. So fits in with our larger world schemas. So in the second sentence I have here, you'll see that I say individuals find meaning as comprehensibility when they are able to make sense of the experience in terms of having deserved its occurrence or justice having prevailed. Do you see how that then fits into the wider schema of people getting what they deserve, right? So you're taking that experience and fitting it into what you know and understand about the world already. So even though we then have this one major category, we have another. I'll talk about the other one just in the next slide. What I want you to further understand is that they're actually subcategories to this category. So when we were developing this typology, we had a very large sample. We had about 300 students, and they told us exactly how they had processed their university experiences. And then we had quotas. It was a very long process. It was the process of my PhD, so it took an entire 5 years. And what we found was that there was so many different ways in which people found meaning as comprehensibility. For the sake of time, I only put two here, and I put an example of personal growth, but there are others. And if you do want to have any further kind of discussion about the others, you're free to contact me on the email address that you've seen me put at the end of the talk. Right, so the two that I found would be most personal, the two that you most likely understand would be experiencing personal growth and life lessons. So when we talk about experiencing personal growth, it's like, for instance, you had something major happen. So for instance, you lost your job, right? You can either just be like, oh, the company was just bad, they just don't appreciate me, or you can see the two sides of it. You can think about the fact that, okay, what can I learn? How can I grow from this experience? What can I change? That's about it. It's about personal growth or a personal change, right? And so you engage with that personal growth. So if we look at so for instance, in that job, in that experience, in that example of losing your job, you say, okay, maybe I was not as organized as possible, or maybe I responded too harshly to a colleague. And so you learn to you focus on working on those aspects and engage in that personal growth. So in a specific example I have here, a student was struggling with getting good grades, and she focused on working on the feedback that she had received, and so did better in the end. So let's read it together. The university has been everything I expected it to be in terms of the social aspect and in terms of independent study. What I found difficult is realizing that I may not always be the best and do really well in assessment. I'm a known perfectionist, and I used to get very high grades at GCSE and A-level psychology, sometimes even 100%. So coming to university and having to adjust to the new assessments and their criteria was hard at first. However, now I am starting to enjoy being able to take on feedback and improve my grades. I got a lot of satisfaction last year from improving my essay mark by 10 marks, just from listening to feedback and working on different aspects a little bit at a time. So you see how she experienced that personal growth. The second example I have here is life lessons, which I thought would be easier for me to explain without an example. So for this one, you focus on what have you learned. So in that, and it tends to not really, it just tends to be one bang done type of lesson, not like any silver lining, those kind of things. Is okay, what will I never do again? That's what that life lesson focus is about. So in that job experience, so losing that job experience that we spoke about, you'll be like, never will I ever give so much to a company again. I'll try to maintain my work-life balance, if that makes sense. So that's a life lesson you get from that experience. So the second one I want us to look at is meaning and significance. Now, this is the cherry on top. This is the one where people are focused on only pulling out all those positive things, those silver linings, those benefits that they've gained from that experience. Right? So it involves determining how the experience has brought worth or value to one's life. That's the academic definition. But if we look a little further, I try to find a little more of a non-academic definition here. So individuals find meaning and significance when they're able to preserve or restore the notion that one's own life has purpose, value, and worth. So you're reinforcing that whole concept of the well-being, that you have meaning, that life has meaning, that you're able to make meaningful contributions. Right? So it's only silver lining. So there are two subtypes I pulled out here, but again, there are multiple subtypes we found in the research that we performed. The first one is about developing skill. So that is the example that we have here, but it's kind of, from the example, you get a bit more understanding of it. So the example reads, the perception of who I am, who I was, and who I want to be has also changed to some degree. As of who I was, I used to think that I was awkward, shy, and more of an introvert than what I figured out that I am now. Now I'm definitely quicker to pick up conversations with people I wouldn't before, as I've realized that there's less to be nervous about. So she's developing those social skills, right? And the other thing that came out was the networking opportunities. So being able to meet different people, make links for your future career, etc. Right? So your take-home message from this part is that you can find meaning in one of many ways. Don't get bogged down in one. Just allow for the variety. How you find meaning can change across different events. So that excerpt came from the same student. So she found different ways of meaning across the different aspects of her university life. How you find meaning can depend on your background. And that was a bit of a further research that we've done since my PhD, where we looked at kind of a BM student group in the Montfort University, and an international, mainly East Asian student group in Queen's University, Belfast. And we found differences in the meaning emerging across the different ethnicities, and how you find meaning can change as you age. And this one is underway. This particular study is underway. All right, so let's go into the core aspect of it, which is how do we actually find meaning? And I'll cover some traditional and some non-traditional methods. So essentially, the core way in which I want to organize this, because there are a lot of things out there, the core things I want to focus on is 4 areas. You need to find meaning in terms of your purpose. So if we look at the bottom figure here, in terms of your purpose, your resourcefulness. So how do you use the things around you to help you to find that meaning? Your optimism. So not seeing challenges as kind of opportunities to give up. And perseverance, so maintaining a level of passion and meaning as you continue on with your life. So maintaining that meaning focus, right? There are different ways in which you can find these 4 things of purpose, resourcefulness, optimism, perseverance, which I like to call prop. So you prop yourself up, you get some resilience. And then academic, which will be particularly important for these students, so they can find academic purpose, academic resourcefulness, academic optimism, academic perseverance. For the rest of us, the things that might be particularly important is our personal emotional purpose, resourcefulness, optimism, and perseverance, or our social purpose, resourcefulness, optimism, and perseverance. Right? I'll define all of these as we go along. So let's start with purpose. So remember, for each of them, You have academic, personal, emotional, and social. The core aspect that I want you to understand when it comes to purpose and the relationship of purpose to finding meaning is that for you to have that meaning, you need to know what that meaning is for you. So you have to figure out what your personal values are and start setting goals for yourself in relation to these personal values, right? And that level of self-awareness that you develop from this aspect, this area of resilience will help with all the other areas that we will deal with in a couple of minutes. Right? So in order to figure out those personal values and be able to set those goals, it's much harder than it seems. Right? I found that as I age, it's a lot easier. But in my 20s, if anybody spoke to me about this, I'll be like, what? I'm like 20. Give me like 10 years. So for the recommended activities for this is about just sitting down and spending time with yourself, thinking about yourself. I know that we're in a world where silence and that reflection is really kind of, they don't make space for it, but for you to actually find your purpose, you need to spend time knowing yourself, right? So consider what you enjoy the most. Do you like achieving excellence? Do you like building meaningful relationships with others? Do you think that you need to feel independent? Do you need to feel that sense of accomplishment? So the key aspect of this, when we're thinking about those things and reflecting, is for us to try kind of developing a personal value list. So what are those values? What are those important values for me? Now, it sounds really hard, so I stumbled upon an activity that will help you with this. It's called the windfall activity. So imagine that you've come into a lot of money, like you've won a lottery, you got like 5 million, right? And you have, but these 5 million is divided into 2 parts. You have 2.5 million and 2.5 million. For the first 2.5 million, you have to spend that on something that is solely related to you, that will solely benefit you, not anybody else, just you. Not your family, just you, right? Unless you do that, you don't get the second part. And the second part, you get to spend that on everybody and contributing to society in any way you can. Now, what you write for those 2 parts will then give you such an insight into what's valuable to you that it is an activity that I strongly recommend. So for instance, when I did this activity, I realized that it was really important for me to work on educational access for all. And so here I am, being a lecturer, right? And that's why I focus on like being research, etc., and the students' experience of being students in particular. So by that type of understanding your values, you're then able to kind of stand more solidly in yourself. And the next thing that we want you to do is not just have those values, but start setting goals in relation to those values, because having that purpose is just the first part. It's about deciding, okay, how can I act on this purpose? Think about having goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, which is a SMART acronym. So specific, for instance, if being fit is relevant to you, it's a goal for you. You don't want to say, oh, I want to lose weight. That's not very specific. You say you want to lose 5 pounds, which is specific and measurable and achievable. We make it achievable by making it kind of have a realistic time limit. So you don't want to lose 5 pounds in a week. That's unhealthy. You may want to lose 5 pounds across a month, right? So in that way, you make it relevant to your goal and you put a time limit on. Also, you can try action points. So you have a large scale goal. What are the small, practical, realistic ways that you can act on to get this goal happening, right? Achieve this value, make this value come into fruition. All right. So the second thing that we spoke about was resourcefulness. So when we talk about resourcefulness, remember, it's like a process. So you have your goals now, you have your values, you've created your goal list. What we want you to then think about is how can you use what you have to put those action points into action, to work on those SMART goals that you've developed. This part of it is about actually putting, not just having it in your head, but making plans to put it into place. You have your plan on your piece of paper, but actually put it into place, like get it going. Right? So the core message of this is getting into the habit of ensuring that how you think and act aligns with your values and your goals. Because it's not just about those values and goals and working on them, but you want to have a consistency across your personality, across your thoughts, across your actions, right? So that you have that consistency and that integration of personality that's so core to being able to find ready meaning in your experiences. So recommended activity of this is engaging in reflective thinking. So spending time after an event, after you've had a thought, after you've acted in a certain way, thinking about that, right? So one of the core or traditional experiences was before you go to bed, you have an examination of your conscience. So what have you done today? What could you have done better, right? And that's what this is about. In recent years, well, not recent, it's been a long since I was a wee one, so it's been around for a long time. It's called journaling, right? So journaling is where you write out about like your experiences, etc. Topics I would suggest are, what can I learn from this experience about myself? What will I do differently in the future? And also try to think about performing a SWOT analysis. So in a specific situation, you responded in a way that was not in alignment with your values and goals. Think about what were your strengths in that situation? What were your weaknesses? If that happens again, what opportunities can you take charge of to change that behavior in the future? But what are these threats? What are these things preventing you from taking charge in the future to make that change? And there are other traditional ways, such as prayer, which naturally enables that reflective thinking, listening to music, and also coloring. It's made a recent comeback in years, but there's actually research to suggest that coloring actually enables that reflective and creative thinking. So now we're on to optimism. In terms of optimism, we essentially want to make sure that you understand that even though you have your goals and you're acting on your goals, so you have that resourcefulness in place, challenges are still going to happen because challenges are a part of life. But don't see challenges as reasons to give up on your goals, but see them as opportunities to grow and develop, right? To get into that flourishing resilience. So one of these core aspects within the literature that has emerged to kind of help us to have this challenge-oriented mindset is having a growth mindset. So when we are young, we tend to be told that you're smart or you're gifted in some way. And that tends to develop within children, this mindset that they have what they need to be successful in life no matter what happens. And that's a fixed mindset. What we want to instead try to develop within ourselves is a growth mindset. And this growth mindset says that I have to learn ways to deal with my experiences better. So life is a learning process. Ways in which we can help ourselves to develop this growth mindset is in terms of mindfulness. And you just have to do a Google search to figure out what mindfulness involves. It's about kind of helping you to stay present in the moment, looking at your body, your environment, kind of getting to know yourself in that way. Puzzles, I love my jigsaws, and this is what it helps me to do. It helps me to rise to a challenge, and I do really big ones, so like 10,000 pieces. Gardening, I do not have a green thumb, but I hear that gardening is very, very good for developing this growth mindset because it gives you a challenge to rise to. And also training your physical body to push through challenges also helps to train your physical mind, your mind to put the psychological mind to go through challenges. So things like physical exercise also helps us to develop this growth mindset. But also, when something happens that is a challenge you can't kind of tackle with those activities, those goals, focus on understanding whether this situation is something that you cannot change. Because if you then try to tackle that thing that you cannot change, it's going to be a losing battle. So try to generate an understanding of things that you can actually change, things that you have control over, things that you can potentially influence, but it relies on other people to really make that change, and things that you cannot change at all. Another way which you can develop this optimism is with a visualization exercise. And that's an easy Google search to find out what that entails. It's just about you sitting down and try to think and imagine situations where you're doing good and positive things. And so the last thing that we're going to deal with is perseverance. The core message related to perseverance is that whatever you're doing, whatever you're acting on, whatever you're thinking, try to keep a level of passion about your life. Passion is so key to this whole resilience aspect, and it comes from that finding meaning. It enables us to find meaning because we're passionate about something. We're more likely to process it in a deep way that's necessary for us to find that meaning. So take time to check in with yourself. Make sure you're still motivated. Make sure you're still passionate about what is core and important to you. So a recommended activity in this way is to keep track of your habits and consider whether these habits are negatively impacting your level of passion, whether you need change in that way. When you're looking at your habits, remind yourself of your personal goals and values. In our wee years, when I was a young one, it was a normal thing for you to have a role model, right? So think about a role model that would help you to keep that passion focused. So for instance, on this slide here, I have Malala Yousafzai. I won't butcher that name, I'm very sorry. And one of her core things that relates to our second thing is having a personal mantra. Sorry, our third thing is about having a personal mantra. One of her core things that she's known of saying is, I don't want to be remembered as the girl who was shot. I want to be remembered as the girl who stood up. So develop your own personal mantra. What do you want to be remembered for? Think, for instance, in terms of an activity that will help you with this is an achievement activity. Think of something that you're proud of achieving. And what would the traits that would necessary for you to have that achievement? And then ignore the achievements and keep those traits. And those traits can form your personal mantra. I am passionate, courageous, brave, those kind of things, right? And stick it up on your mirror. I know we've seen different movies where people have their to-do list stuck up in the mirror, but stick up your mantra on your mirror. Stick up your mantra in different places, right? And follow inspirational podcasts and blogs so that you keep around you people and reminders of the needs to stay passionate and motivated. So that's the end of the talk today. And just a brief summary. Well-being is not happiness. It involves your capacity to make positive contributions to society. And there's an importance of resilience within this. You can move from dysfunctional to survival and then to flourishing resilience. And it can be a lifelong process that changes based on our experience or background and as we age. Core to this resilience process is making sense of your experiences, and there are a variety of ways in which you can find that meaning. And there are many ways in which many things we can do to help us to find this meaning. And these include traditional and non-traditional aspects. So as promised, these are my contact details, and you're free to get in touch if you want any further resources in relation to what I covered today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that talk, Karisha. Like, that was very interesting, and I think almost validating just what you said at the start of the talk about how there can be a disruption in the resilient process. I feel like a lot of people within the audience, as well as myself, can relate to that. Whereas sometimes there is a disruption, and then you feel like you're not as resilient or you're not as strong. But in fact, that's normal. So I have a few questions. My first question is, so I know you talked about one of the ways to develop flourishing resilience is through the support of religion. And I wanted to ask, is there any other way known to facilitate flourishing resilience?
Well, thank you for that question. That's a good question. So the main reason I focused on religion was just because that was an area that I did in my postdoc, and it was an area that I just wanted to do further research in. But there are a range of other things. So for instance, one of the ways within that study that these students highlighted to us is the role that religion plays is that it provides them with social support. So I would definitely say that social support and social support that matters to you have consistently emerged as one of the core aspects that help you to find that. But when we're talking about social support, you have to find that social support with people who have the same values and goals as you, and who can support you in your development of those goals that you want to have in life, right? Another way in which you can do this is, for instance, in terms of positive thinking. So positive thinking relates directly to that optimism factor that we spoke about, but positive thinking and negative thinking exist on two different continuums. So people tend to think if you have more positive thoughts, you will automatically have less negative thoughts, but someone can have equal amounts of positive and negative thoughts. So it's about feeding these positive thoughts that help you to kind of be able to more likely find those silver lining and those benefits in your experiences.
Okay, thank you. I had another question that I'm sure some of the audience will be curious about as well. Is it possible for you to be in flourishing resilience and then have an event or something that leads you to not be flourishing in the same way?
Yeah, so I spoke about the fact that you can be in survival resilience and then bounce down. But yeah, so flourishing resilience, the reason why that kind of reduces the capacity for us to have that bouncing down to this functional survival resilience is because it enables us to develop the protective factors that are necessary. So it kind of strengthens our muscles and our capacity to find meaning, for instance. But yes, you can have something happen, especially with something that is so much more severe than all the experiences that you've had before, that finding meaning muscle might just break as a result of that experience. And you have to learn again how to find meaning. So yes, it is quite normal for people to go from flourishing resilience down to dysfunctional resilience if they have a major life experience that they can't find any kind of meaning in.
Okay. Would you say it's like a cycle, or like how would you describe that process? Is it just like,
I think it's kind of it's a hill, I would more say.
a
So
hill? Yeah.
when you kind of get to flourishing resilience, you kind of stay at the top of that hill if you have those protective factors. But if you don't, then that pushes you down, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. That does make sense. Okay, I think I have one more question. You mentioned how finding meaning can differ depending on your background. I wondered if you could expand on that. Like, so you mentioned how like your research was with regard to ethnicity. I was just wondering like how exactly finding meaning could differ based on ethnicity and background.
So thank you for that question, actually, because I do want to expand a bit more on this research. So what we found across the BM students was that they had deeper things that they had to make sense of or find meaning in, things that had not come up previously because we have a largely white population. So for the Black and African students, it was an intense feeling of not belonging at university. And so they found meaning by overcoming this imposter syndrome. So it's not easy. So it was so different from that personal growth that we had before. It was more about overcoming not belonging. So overcoming those feelings of not feeling right in your skin. For the East Asian students, they seem to carry with them this sense of responsibility to their parents. So they came to university feeling like if they were there and they had to succeed because their parents had put so much and invested so much in them. So for them, it was overcoming this feeling of responsibility or kind of managing their desires and their parental or familiar responsibilities. And that's that form of meaning that they were needed to find in their university.
Thank you. That was really interesting. That's because I think I can relate to that. That is the imposter syndrome and even the responsibility to your parents. I think that's, yeah, very relatable. Okay, one last question. So you mentioned several methods for helping develop higher levels of resilience. Is there one that, like we talked about the mirror and other things like that? I was thinking, which one would you particularly recommend?
Well, that's the thing. I have my own preferences. So I do have my mantra. And like how Beyonce has her fashion first, I have my second alter ego that like helps me boost my confidence. But I think that that's particularly because of the experiences that I have had, that what I tend to struggle with to some degree is maintaining that level of not being overwhelmed by challenges, because challenges sometimes come one after the other after the other. And so for me, it would be about you figuring out which aspects of that top resilience model that you struggle the most with and finding one that works for you. And it's okay if that one that works for you doesn't work for you for every experience. So you kind of dip your toes into whichever one based on what you think might work, but also trial different things out. So if you've never gardened, try to garden. No matter how many plants you kill, you should keep trying at it if you think you'll be good at it. Whatever helps you to have that kind of mindset that challenges is something that you can overcome. That is something that I recommend, and try it out until you have something that works for you, but know that that might change over.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try and do some more puzzles. I want to thank everybody for being here for this talk, and a special thank you to Karisha George for speaking in this talk. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed.
Okay, bye.
Bye.